They called it the French disease. The French called it the Neapolitan disease. Others swore it was a curse from God, but what Europe was really facing was something far more terrifying, a silent invader that rotted the body from the inside out. In the final years of the 15th century, as Renaissance Europe celebrated art, discovery, scientific curiosity, and the rebirth of classical knowledge, a new horror spread quietly across the continent. Painters were perfecting perspective. Architects were reshaping skylines. Scholars were rediscovering ancient philosophy. And beneath this surface of brilliance, something dark was multiplying. It did not arrive with thunder or fire. It arrived quietly, carried in blood, in skin, in intimacy, in whispered encounters behind closed doors. Syphilis. The first great recorded outbreak erupted in 1494 during the Italian Wars. When King Charles VIII of France invaded Naples, his vast multinational army of mercenaries, French, Swiss, Spanish, German, gathered in crowded military camps, makeshift brothels, and devastated urban quarters. These were environments of exhaustion, hunger, and uncontrolled contact. Within months, soldiers began developing strange sores, unlike anything physicians had previously described. Painful ulcers appeared on their genitals and inside their mouths. Soon after, their bodies erupted in widespread rashes. Fever followed. Hair fell out in clumps onto filthy camp floors. Flesh decayed. Bones ached as if burning from within. Some men became so disfigured that even their comrades recoiled from them. Contemporaries were horrified not only by the suffering, but by the speed and severity of the affliction. Early cases of syphilis appear to have been extraordinarily aggressive compared to later centuries. Witnesses described faces collapsing as cartilage dissolved, noses rotting away, limbs covered in ulcerating pustules that emitted a foul odor. Chroniclers wrote of men who seemed to rot while still alive. Some victims died within months, their bodies exhausted by infection and secondary complications. The disease spread with the relentless movement of armies. Soldiers carried it from Italy to France, from France to Spain, from Spain into the German states and beyond. Military demobilization accelerated diffusion into civilian populations. Ports magnified transmission. Sailors, merchants, and travelers unknowingly became vectors. Trade routes, symbols of Renaissance connectivity, transformed into biological highways. By the turn of the 16th century, syphilis had embedded itself in nearly every major European city, from Lisbon to Krakow. No one understood what it was, and that ignorance amplified the terror. Physicians of the Renaissance operated within the ancient framework of humoral theory. They believed illness emerged from imbalance among blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Treatments were designed to restore equilibrium through bleeding, purging, and sweating. Yet syphilis defied categorization. Its symptoms shifted. It mimicked other diseases. It vanished and reappeared. Some astrologers insisted rare planetary conjunctions had poisoned the air. Others argued that God had unleashed it as punishment for the perceived moral decay of the age. Preachers thundered from cathedral pulpits, describing it as divine retribution for lust, prostitution, and the loosening of traditional social restraints. Stigma formed instantly and viciously. Each nation assigned blame outward. Italians blamed the French invaders. The French blamed the Spanish. The Russians labeled it the Polish disease. The Ottomans called it the Christian disease. Naming became a political weapon, a way to externalize fear and avoid responsibility. Disease was transformed into accusation. Treatments reflected desperation rather than knowledge. Mercury became the dominant therapy despite its toxicity. Patients were stripped and covered in mercury ointment before being wrapped tightly in blankets to induce profuse sweating. Others inhaled mercury vapors in sealed wooden boxes, their heads protruding while their bodies absorbed poisonous fumes. Some swallowed mercury mixtures, enduring violent salivation and intestinal distress. The idea was to purge corruption through bodily fluids. In reality, mercury poisoning frequently caused severe neurological damage, tooth loss, organ failure, and death. Yet the suffering produced visible reactions, sweating, drooling, which convinced both doctor and patient that something active was happening. Hence the grim proverb, "A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury." Guaiacum wood, imported from the Caribbean, offered hope without the metallic cruelty of mercury. It was expensive, exotic, and marketed as a miracle from newly discovered lands. Patients drank concentrated decoctions for weeks, sweating under heavy coverings in overheated rooms. Some temporarily improved, perhaps due to the natural waxing and waning of symptoms. Most relapsed. Beyond physical suffering, syphilis destabilized social order. It struck indiscriminately across class boundaries. Aristocrats concealed symptoms behind masks and cosmetics. Clergy feared exposure not only of illness, but of moral contradiction. Artists and intellectuals lived under suspicion. Rumors alone could end careers. The possibility that prominent figures such as Albrecht Dürer or Cesare Borgia may have been infected reflects how deeply the disease penetrated elite circles, even if definitive diagnoses remain debated among historians. Urban authorities experimented with containment. Certain cities temporarily closed brothels. Marriage regulations tightened. Public health ordinances expanded. Yet enforcement was inconsistent and often hypocritical. Demand for intimacy persisted. Human behavior proved more resilient than legislation. What made Renaissance syphilis uniquely terrifying was its deceptive chronology. The first stage appeared mild, a solitary sore, often painless, which healed spontaneously. Many believed themselves cured. Weeks later, the second stage erupted dramatically. Rashes spreading across torso, limbs, palms, and soles, lesions inside the mouth, persistent fever, overwhelming fatigue. Then, without warning, symptoms receded. Silence followed. For years, sometimes decades, the infected individual appeared outwardly healthy. During this latent phase, marriages were formed, children conceived, social roles maintained. Yet internally, Treponema pallidum continued its slow invasion. It infiltrated blood vessels, damaged connective tissue, penetrated the nervous system. The body became a battlefield without visible smoke. In tertiary syphilis, destruction reached its peak. Gummatous lesions consumed bone and flesh. Cardiovascular collapse threatened survival. Neurosyphilis eroded personality itself. Paranoia intensified. Judgment deteriorated. Memory fractured. Some patients exhibited grandiosity and mania before descending into profound dementia. Families witnessed loved ones transform into strangers long before death claimed them. By the mid-16th century, more systematic clinical observation emerged. Italian physician Girolamo Fracastoro proposed that epidemic diseases might spread through invisible seeds of contagion, a remarkably prescient idea anticipating germ theory by centuries. In 1530, he published the poetic narrative Syphilis Civ Morbus Gallicus, embedding medical theory within literature. The shepherd Syphilis, punished by divine wrath, gave the disease its enduring name. Despite improved description, effective therapy remained absent. Over time, however, many observers noted that the most explosive, disfiguring presentations seemed to decline in frequency. Some modern scholars hypothesize evolutionary adaptation, that the pathogen moderated its lethality to sustain transmission within host populations. The origin question remains unresolved. The Columbian hypothesis suggests sailors returning from the Caribbean in 1493 introduced a New World strain into immunologically naive European populations. Skeletal findings in the Americas support the presence of treponemal disease before contact. Alternatively, some argue a pre-existing Old World strain mutated or intensified under wartime conditions. Paleopathological evidence continues to be debated. Regardless of its genesis, syphilis reshaped Renaissance consciousness. It exposed the fragility beneath cultural triumph. It accelerated discussion about contagion, morality, and state responsibility. It demonstrated how rapidly fear can distort reason and how quickly societies assign blame when confronted with uncertainty. Syphilis was not merely an infection. It was a revelation of vulnerability in an age that believed it was rediscovering mastery over nature. While artists painted divine beauty and scholars translated Aristotle, an invisible spiral bacterium undermined flesh and confidence alike. By the 17th century, the disease had transitioned from apocalyptic shock to chronic reality. It would not meet truly effective treatment until penicillin emerged in the 20th century. But in the Renaissance, before microbiology, before antibiotics, before scientific certainty, syphilis embodied existential dread, an unseen adversary moving silently through bedsheets and battlefields, through monasteries and marketplaces, through power and poverty, through faith and flesh. And for those who endured its first terrifying wave, it must have felt as though civilization itself was dissolving beneath their skin. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and a comment. Subscribe for more true stories from history. Your support helps this channel grow.